Ahoj, vítáme všechny, které zajímá život a studium v USA. Jsme tady, abychom vám přinesli další dávku inspirace a informací. Já jsem Adam.
A já jsem Ondra.
A vítáme vás u Studygate podcastu, kde se společně pustíme do rozkrývání nástrah i nových příležitostí, které si pro nás Spojené státy připravily.
Ať už plánujete studovat v USA, nebo jste prostě jen zvědaví, čím se život ve státech liší, těšíme se, že vám přineseme nový pohled na věc, ale také praktické tipy od našich hostů. Těšíme se na vás u dalších dílů Studygate podcastu.
I hope that they also appreciate that there's a difference between truthfulness and lies, and that's what we also talk about a lot. Who decides then whether this person's a Czech or a German? I love the sense of humor. When I first started speaking, people couldn't really understand me, but now I think people are more used to foreigners speaking Czech, so it's a little easier. This is kind of a silly answer, but I love smažák. One friend of mine told me that Czech culture is like one big inside joke.
Welcome to the Studygate podcast. Today with Professor Chad Bryant from UNC Chapel Hill, a historian who focuses on nationalism and the urban experience in Central and Eastern Europe, particularly in the Czech Republic. One of his most famous books is called Prague, Belonging in the Modern City. Hello, Professor Bryant. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And thank you for inviting me here.
Of course. Professor, you have 5-star rating from students on a Rate My Professor page, which is amazing. There is like 30 ratings, and I think over 90% of students said they would take your course again, which is very impressive. How do you approach teaching history, and what do you hope students gain from your courses?
Oh, that's a great question. It's not the most scientific survey, Rate My Professor, but my teaching evaluations are okay too. So I think there's a couple things I hope the students get out. And one is I love taking them to a new place and a new time, having them try to imagine being in that place and time. And that's why I love doing European history and especially Bohemian and Czech history, because most of the students have never been to Europe, let alone this part of the world. And for them, it's a great adventure. And a lot of them end up then traveling there, getting even more out of that. So that's exciting. I also hope that they learn to think critically about things that they read and understand that everything that they read or hear is created in a context and it's done for a meaning. And also, I hope that they also appreciate that there's a difference between truthfulness and lies, and that's what we also talk about a lot. And finally, I hope that they learn to appreciate a good story. So history is about telling stories, and it's how we make sense of the world as well. And I think all these things together are things that they take away from the class and into the real world and into their jobs, and hopefully they enjoy it along the way.
And you are teaching in Czech Republic and also in USA. Are there any differences between students in Czech and in USA?
Well, when I taught in the Czech Republic, I taught mostly gymnasium or high school students, as well as I guess what we technická škola, technical school students. Mm-hmm. And I also taught managers at a steel factory. So it's a different sort of population than North Carolina college students. And it was a long time ago as well. But I think and there was kind of the opposite. Like there I was the exotic person from America in the Czech Republic in 1993, where people wanted to know more about this exotic land. And they knew more about the Czech Republic than I did at that time, of course.
And you are teaching quite a wide variety of courses. And I like the one history of lies and misinformations. I think even these days, there are a lot of misinformations which are affecting us. Can you explain this class a little bit more? And do you have some tip how to protect ourselves against them?
No, I think the tip would be I think there's been many efforts, as you know, within the Czech Republic by the government to fight disinformation. And I think that the tip I would have for my students is to, and many in the United States, is to see what's been working and what hasn't been working in Czechia. So that's like the first thing. And yeah, I love teaching that class. It's so in one way we talk about disinformation, conspiracy theories from the 18th century to the present, and why they developed and the reasons behind them. We're not trying to disprove them, but more like why they develop and what purpose they have for people. And oftentimes it's out of fear, it's out of for political advantage and so forth. And there's some very serious ones, but there's also a lot of fun ones. Like, do you know birds aren't real? That's it's one which there's a conspiracy theory that birds aren't real, that they're all like mechanical pieces of machinery that the government uses to spy on us. And it was started as a joke by some college students. But there too, it's the same thing. Right? Read sources and think critically, and also it's a way of thinking about how historians try to make sense of the world in a way that we try to be truthful as much as we can. That's the other sort of takeaway of that course. And we talk a lot about space elements too.
Can you please provide an overview of your research interests, particularly your interest about nationalism, and the urban experience?
Yeah. So after I taught in the Czech Republic, I was a newspaper reporter for a while, and then I decided that I wanted to go to graduate school and become a professor. And my interest in nationalism began actually with my first book, which was about the Nazi occupation of part of Czechoslovakia, protector of Bohemian Moravia. And I came across this document by a man who was claiming to be a Czech, even though the Nazi official who was receiving this letter claimed that he was a German. And this was important because Germans were being recruited into the army at that time, among other things. Mm-hmm. And so this made me think, well, who decides then whether this person's a Czech or a German, and why is he making such a big deal of this? Mm-hmm. And that became the kernel of that first book. How do we decide? Who decides nationality, and why does it matter? And then with the second book, I kind of built on some of those themes of asking how do people find a sense of belonging in a city, especially in which they're not the majority nationality or the majority class or religion. And there I became fascinated in spaces in cities and practices in cities, and how city such as Prague but elsewhere has this magical potential for creating a sense of belonging, even if you're not in the majority culture.
What does it mean to be a urban historian, and how do you approach studying cities as kind of dynamic entities, with their own histories, identities? And that's one question. And I have a second one about quantitative or qualitative research, mainly probably qualitative one. And what are the best approaches how to do research focusing on urban history?
Yeah, that's a great question. So urban history, we often talk in history about methodologies, which means like a way, it's other social sciences and humanities, it's like the way that you go about the methods you use to sort of work through sources and understand the truth. And urban history really isn't a methodology. It's more of a framework. It basically means you're studying cities. And within that, people do a lot of different things. And so, for example, people do quantitative studies, migration, population studies, crime rates, and other things like that you can trace over time to see how cities develop. And then there are the qualitative methods, which I tend to do more of, which draw upon, well, among other things, people's perceptions, experiences, and also their practices, everyday practices. So for my last book, I used a lot of first-person writing, so ego documents. But one of the favorite sources for many urban historians are newspapers, because they tell you so much about the city. It's partly what I'm going to be doing my next project on. I'm going to be teaching courses on newspapers and cities.
I would like to focus a little bit more on your stay in Czech Republic. How did you even end up in the heart of Europe, and what fascinates you most about Czech history?
Oh yeah, so it was actually a pure accident in some ways. I wish it was like a longer story, but I was a history and a German major in college, and at the time, as I was graduating, a friend of mine struck up a conversation with two people who had just come back from teaching in Nový Město na Moravě, and they loved the experience. This was 1992. She met, and we were 3 or 4 months from graduation, and we realized that this was our last chance to do something something totally free and different, and it was exciting because I had visited Prague before, but only for a few days, and I was really struck by it. But the idea of living outside of Prague and getting to experience a new culture for a year and learn about a country 4 years after the fall of communism was really exciting. So yeah, and it was from that moment that I really fell in with the country. I love the sense of humor, which I don't always understand. One friend of mine told me that Czech culture is like one big inside joke.
Yeah. No, I think that's right, and thank you for mentioning that, because many my friends here in the US, they sometimes don't understand my jokes, and it's really hard to explain to them that it's really a joke. It's not. I don't mean it any offensive or anything. It's just how we are in the Czech Republic.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. I think it's a wonderful way of being. And I love the food, and now I have very good friends there too. My kids have very good friends, and my wife has family. So there's a lot of things bringing me back, but it always makes me very happy to go back.
And you mentioned that you were teaching in a factory. How was that? It sounds quite unusual to me.
Oh yeah, it was wonderful. So it was in the Žďás factory, and I should have looked up before this, like what is happening now in the Žďás factory. It was a large factory built after World War II by the communists in Žďár nad Záhřebom, right on the train line, and they were obviously transitioning, after 1989. And so one of the aspects of that transition was that the various managers of the steel factory needed to learn English very quickly. But every morning I would walk through the steel factory gates, and it was during break time, and so there was always polka music. For some reason, there was always polka music playing as I walked toward the classroom, which was high. And I come from Pittsburgh, so I have been in steel factories before. My father was a metallurgist, and many of my friends' fathers worked in steel factories. So that was maybe one of the least foreign things that I experienced when I was in Žďár.
But that sounds like a really cool experience. And you already mentioned that you are visiting the Czech Republic, that your family have friends there. So do you want to conduct more research about the Czech history, Czech cities, and kind of visit the Czech Republic more often?
Yeah. I tend to go back. We tend to go back as a family every summer. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and even when my kids were younger, they used to go to a Czech school in June. So, which they loved sometimes, and because it was their summer break.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm always making plans to go back and do more research. And in fact, in a few weeks, I'm going back, and I'm going to hopefully do some research in some archives, not just in Prague, but around the country.
It's awesome.
And Adam mentioned that you wrote a book about Prague. What was the themes and findings of this book? And is Prague your favorite city in Czech Republic?
Oh, I shouldn't say that. It's a good way to make enemies. I have many favorite cities, but it's different, obviously. All cities being the capital city. So I think that was like the argument of that book was there were two parts of it. One was that Prague is extremely interesting because it's sort of the stage and the theater for not just politics, but also for national belonging. So memorials, political events, political rallies, major historical events. Often, if they don't happen in Prague, they're often commemorated in Prague, and then housed in the library. It's in the National Library. But at the same time, Prague is this incredible sort of mixture of people, not just from around Bohemia. Many of the awakeners were first-generation college students who arrived to Prague from the countryside, but also, especially before 1945, German speakers and Jews. My last chapter is about Vietnamese women and migration, and also people from just different walks of life and different classes. And so the argument in the book was sort of like I said before, even that Prague is this sort of this major symbol and theater for nationalism and nationalism that justifies political power. And it's also has this remarkable ability for people to find their own sense of belonging, whether it be in cafes or in activities such as strolling in parks or attending or working in theater, attending theater. People find, just like universities in some way, big cities like Prague allow people to find their own people. We have this idea that cities create alienation and loneliness, which can be true, but cities also have this when done well, have this amazing sort of potential for everybody to find themselves, whether they be LGBTQ or whatever it may be. If you're an outsider, you can often find other people who feel like you or identify with you in some ways in big cities. I think that's the magic of cities. And Prague is an exception. So.
Yeah, I really like you mentioned belonging. And so how does belonging, what does it really mean, belonging, and in context of cities? Or do I understand it correctly that like cities are kind of our identity and can shape our identities?
Yeah, I think for sure. Well, I guess there's two things that are sort of at play here. One is that cities shape our identities or our sense of belonging in a lot of different ways. And oftentimes, especially historians based in the U.S. tend to think that, or they tend to overemphasize nationality. A person is either only Czech or German, Italian, American, but people are also Praguers, also the fans of football teams, and they're also they associate with other groups, religious groups, in different ways too. So I think that's like one part of it, and two, I guess in terms of the sense of belonging as a concept. I'm hoping to write an article about this soon. Is like there's two ways of thinking about it. One is belonging as a way in which states especially exclude people. So they create national communities of belonging, typically around citizenship, or migration laws and so forth. But the other, which is what this book is about, is the argument is that beginning in the early 19th century, with the rise of industrialization and urbanization, secularization, migration to the cities, that it became a responsibility of everybody in the modern world, which is still true today, to create for yourself, your own sense of belonging, which wasn't necessarily true before, when you and your descendants had typically lived in the same place for generations, and there was religion was much more prominent and so forth. And that's sort of the meta argument that Prague is used to make, is that like a search for a sense of belonging, whether it be through clubs and associations or like I said, meeting people in cafes, or finding people and joining a sports team, following a sports team, that this is all ways that we have to find a sense of belonging. And it's something that we all have to do. It kind of unites us. And there are some people for whom that's even more difficult or even more important. People who are excluded by the majority culture.
Yeah, with Prague, what I feel like it's people, they are kind of when they are in Prague, they are shaping their own identity and they kind of belong to Prague. But also, I'm not from Prague, and you are when someone says, "Oh, I'm from Prague," you immediately kind of assign certain image to them, if that makes sense. So yeah, I really appreciate what you said, like with the belonging and all the cities and this stuff. But how do cultural and urban myths influence the collective identity of cities, mainly Prague, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think you can kind of go behind the question, and it's like who's making the myths or the histories, and so forth, and for what purpose? I mean, there's one industry, of course, around the tourist industry that creates various myths, and that's not for Czech consumption. It's for other people's consumptions, and it's remarkably uniform, because in many ways. And then there are things like school books and so forth that have their own narratives about sort of national history, which is good. I mean, we all need a sense of national belonging, right? Through nationhood, and I think that's often done through school books, even though they also can be problematic. And there are also sort of stories about the city that are written in the landscape. So you may not think about it, but street sign, monuments, and of course, like museums and so forth, they're all telling smaller stories, and I think that's also sort of something that's really peculiar to cities as well. That there's so many stories about the city that are literally everywhere. The great historian Lewis Mumford once said that cities themselves are like museums. There's always traces of the past, and some of them are deliberately meant to be read, but then others are just there to be read. And Prague's especially like vibrant in that way because so many of the buildings have survived over the centuries, unlike many European capitals. So it's especially rich there.
And you mentioned that after teaching, you became a newspaper reporter. What motivated you to do this change, and did it help to your current job?
Yeah, I think it helped a lot. So I was actually a fact checker. Journalist is a big word. I was a fact checker for a magazine in Washington, D.C. called The Washingtonian. And then I was a local reporter in a small town in Missouri, in Marshall, Missouri. And I think one of the main things that job especially did was to teach me to ask a lot of questions and to learn a lot about a lot of different things, to be curious about a lot of different things, and to write very fast. So I had, because there's a deadline and the newspaper goes out and there's only 2 reporters at the newspaper, then that's a great responsibility to produce 2 stories a day. But also it gave me a sense, going back to urban history, it gave me a sense of, it was a small town, but just to see like all the effort that went into making that small town work, like the sewer system had to work, the garbage had to be picked up, how the police worked. The city is this big organism, and even towns too are organisms. I got a great appreciation for that, and also the efforts that make running a good city or town go.
Yeah, it's amazing how, as you said, like city is a huge organism, and many people just lived in cities. New York, everyone is just moving super quick, but when you stop in the middle of city and just like see all the moving parts and everything, it's just amazing, all the stories you can see, and I really like that. It's pretty cool. How would you compare New York and Prague and their identities?
Oh, that's I've never lived in New York, so that's
Pittsburgh.
Oh, that's a good question. Um, well, I mean, one big difference that comes to mind is that, I mean, like I said, Prague is a capital city, and Pittsburgh is a post-industrial city now.
Mm-hmm.
When I was growing up, it was the heart of the steel industry, and it's transitioned in various ways now. And I think both have had to sort of rewrite their narratives
Mm-hmm.
since then. So
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh now prides itself, on having a very vibrant medical research community based around the universities and big tech communities with their self-driving cars
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. Or so I hear. And they also pride themselves on being very multicultural, having a lot of different former immigrant communities that make up the landscape. And so, yeah, I think so. Prague has had to also rewrite its own history since 1989,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll be interesting to see like how that kind of develops over time. But I think there's a lot of differences. There's many differences between the two. So.
We also have a couple of questions from our listeners. And one of them is, what do you like most in Czech Republic? And is there something you wish to take from Czech Republic to the USA?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I mean, this is kind of a silly answer, but I love smažák, and I still have not been able to create this smažák here, and knedlíky too. Like I still haven't been able to have a proper knedlíky or even like a proper pilsner from the tap.
Uh-huh.
And in some ways I don't try hard enough because then it becomes special. But I guess I also appreciate something that I think many people in the U.S. can sort of appreciate and learn from is like just the Czech sort of, I don't know, modesty or skromný is the word, but it's very refreshing to like just speak with people and not feel that, I don't know, to appreciate the modesty that comes with a lot of the conversations that we
Mm-hmm.
and also just the appreciation for arts and culture, and especially I think, and this is the last thing, it's one thing I absolutely loved when my kids were younger is this celebration of childhood, of children's literature and film,
Mm-hmm.
Dendieti,
Mm.
and there's a real celebration of that time of life. It's something that should be appreciated, and not just about getting good grades and seeing your child succeed, but appreciating childhood for the sake of childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't know if that's peculiarly Czech or not, but it's something that I've noticed that was quite different from the US. Not that people here don't appreciate childhood, but it's really baked into the culture in so many ways. So many events that are designed to include children, or
Mm-hmm.
dětský kotek.
Yeah.
Like that's something, like things like that. That's really, I think those things are wonderful.
Yeah. The question from listeners was, what is your favorite Czech food or beverage? But you mentioned smažák and everything. And I would just, so now there is Lidl in United States, and they have actually, if you go to their freezers, they have smažák there actually. And you can buy it. So we have one in Charlotte, and I believe you have some in close to UNC Chapel Hill or around Raleigh. So I would encourage you to go there. They have even knedlíky and everything. So
I have to say too, something that I very much appreciate more recently in Prague is the Vietnamese food. It's such good Vietnamese food. It's more available, like quick on the hand, but also restaurants. And going to Sakpas, I always love taking people to Sakpa.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you are mentioning that, because we are sometimes traveling with Ondra. I'm a huge fan of Vietnamese food, so we always go to Vietnamese places. So, and I agree, Czech Republic has a huge kind of culture, let's say, or many places there sell really, really good food. So yeah, I agree.
And other question from our listeners is, Do you find the Czech language difficult?
Oh yes, smažák. Yeah, no, I think it's I haven't lived there for a long time, for a couple years now. So every time I go back, it takes like a week or two for it to come back to me. And like I said, my accent is fine. I think people, when I first started speaking, people couldn't really understand me, but now I think people are more used to foreigners speaking Czech, so it's a little easier. But I like it. And I think it's interesting, like when it's just a lot of little things that aspect is this the verb, psát, napsat. Often I still have to always stop and think often before doing that. But I love speaking Czech, and it's that magical moment I could like spend an evening with someone and have a whole conversation. That's when I felt like I had done something proper in life. So.
And do you have some favorite Czech word?
Oh, pohoda is my
Pohoda. That's a good one.
Yeah. So, I have a good friend in republiku.Př, and Veronica, she and I agree that there's no good translation of pohoda, at least in English.
Yeah, there is not.
It's one of the best words. It's what everybody should strive for, at some point during the week.
Yeah, I guess I would use just relax or chill or something in that way. But yeah. I agree with you that there is no really good translation I can think about.
There's a little bit of Zen in there.
Exactly.
But yeah, to je pohoda. Even when you say it, you kind of like relax. To je pohoda.
Yeah, that's true. So are urban legends something that may reflect the culture and identity of the place?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if they stay alive over time. I think I'm trying to think of a good example in Prague of an urban legend that has been alive for a while. It says something. Yeah, maybe like, it's not really a legend. I mean, it's a legend created in the 17th century of the defenestration of Prague. Whether the nobles were landed on a heap of dung or manure, or whether they were caught by angels. I know that's a very cliched one. But I think that in itself kind of like speaks to like this, that there's two sides to every story. These legends continue, but I should be able to think of a better legend.
No, this one is good. This one is good, and it fascinates me always to hear urban legends, and Prague is full of them.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Absolutely.
And are you currently working on some research?
Yeah. So, well, actually, even this morning I was working with my co-authors, Kateřina Čapková, who's based in Prague, and Diana Dumitru, who's based in Moldova, Georgetown University, and we're coming close to finishing a manuscript that's a revisionist history of the Slansky tribe, but it's also a larger history of the Czechoslovak Communist Party from 1921 to 1954. So it's been exciting to work with them. Really, we found some really Katka especially found very exciting documents in Prague before and during, right after the pandemic, and both of them found very exciting documents in Moscow before the Russian invasion of Ukraine as well. So we're coming close to that, which will be fun.
Is there any advice you would give to students pursuing a career in history or aspiring academics based on your own experiences?
Yeah, my own. So, I think, the first thing that I would say is that, like, taking a course in history or minoring in history doesn't mean that you have to become an historian. People go on to do many different things with this skill set, whether it be law or teaching. Many go into business. Many do different types of research-based work. And that's because the skills are about, doing research, communicating well, thinking critically about sources, and telling a good story, and also empathy. I think history creates empathy in those who practice it, because you have to imagine yourself in a different time and place and get in other people's minds. And not necessarily that means that you like the people, but you can understand where they're coming from. As for Korean history, it's frankly very hard right now. There are history as a profession is not as vibrant. Right? There's fewer positions at universities in the U.S. for historians than there were 20 or 30 years ago, and that number continues to decline. And so there are more people who are going to graduate school now who, unfortunately don't find a job being a professor, even if that's their main goal, and often end up doing other things as well. So hopefully that'll turn around. But I think it's part of the larger contraction of humanities and social sciences more general in U.S. universities.
Awesome. So thank you very much for the interview. Thank you very much for your time, and good luck with your research. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you very much. Pokud vás tento příběh zaujal a chtěli byste si život v USA vyzkoušet na vlastní kůži, podívejte se na náš web study.gate.cz.